Whether you have this intuition that yes, there's more to us than the physical body or not, whether you believe in that or not, see if you can stay open to that possibility. Yeah, thank you again, Virinadu. Very nice to be here. So, yes, I want to try and evoke something of this extraordinary event that happened 2,500 years ago, the Buddha's Parinirvana. And fortunately, we've got, well, this incredible sutta in the Pali Canon called the Mahaparinibana Sutter, which details in quite a lot of incidents the last year of the Buddha's earthly existence. Parinibbana means literally, it's something like nirvana, the attainment of nirvana without remainder. And the remainder is the body. So the Buddha was already in nirvana, as it were. His mind had already attained to nirvana at the age of 35 under the Bodhi tree in what today is called Bodh Gaya. He then spent the 45 years of his life remaining wandering around northern India teaching the Dharma. And so by the time the Mahaparinibana Sutta begins, he's an old man, he's 80 years old, and his body is wrecked, really sort of, well, he says to Ananda, his friend and his cousin and his attendant, that his body is like an old cart that is being held together by ropes, strapped together by ropes. But he's still wondering. He's still wondering, and he's still teaching. He's not sort of retired. The Buddha never retired. Perhaps Buddhists never retire, although I've been wondering about when there might be a sort of decent time without being too sort of humiliating to put my feet up. I've been wondering that for the last 20 years, actually. But the Buddha didn't. The Buddha is just on the road, really. I mean, for most of the year, he's wandering, teaching the Dharma. He did that because he wanted as many people to hear the truth of the Dharma as possible. There wasn't this, at that time, there wouldn't have been great, big, settled monastic centres. It would have been, the Buddha's followers would have wandered with him through the plains and forests and villages of northern India. And yeah, this sutta has many beautiful incidents, and I'm not going to be able to, I haven't got time to talk about all of them. I'm just going to pick a few that I want to touch on. So one incident that I'm going to begin with is the Buddha relinquishing. It's said that he relinquished, consciously relinquished his life force. Well, a bit of background. First of all, what happens is, in the sutta, the Buddha says to Ananda, Ananda's his constant companion, so they're always together. Ananda is also the same sort of age as the Buddha, so you've got these two old friends who have lived the Dharma life together. Ananda's not enlightened, although not fully enlightened. He's actually a stream entrant, which is pretty enlightened, but he's not fully enlightened. And he serves the Buddha. Anyway, the Buddha says to Ananda, you know, Ananda, a fully enlightened Buddha, could live till the end of the world period if he was asked to, if he wanted to. And the world period being like an aeon, like the end of this universe in a way. If he was so inclined, he could live that long. And Ananda says, "Oh, that's very interesting." And the Buddha's saying, yes, if he was asked to, he could live till the end of this word. Oh, that's very good, says Ananda. The Buddha says this 3 times to Ananda, and Ananda doesn't take the hint. And then Mara. Now, Mara is, in the tradition, the personification of death. And he pops up throughout Buddha's life. He's like a sort of, he's not like an evil, satanic kind of figure. He's more like a mischievous rogue who, I don't know why I'm looking at my Chinara. You're not Mara. He's a sort of mischievous figure who tries to tempt the Buddha off the path, and of course always fails and always sort of slinks away rather despondently. Anyway, he says to the Buddha, he's not just a personification of death, of course, he's the personification of samsara, of conditioned existence, this unenlightened existence that all of us share, this world of suffering, of pain, of this endless round of birth and death and craving. He's the personification of that. He's the ruler of that. And so he comes up to the Buddha, appears before the Buddha and says, look, Buddha, you had said to me that, and this is sort of true, you had said to me that when your Sangha was established in the Dharma, when there were bhikkhus and bhikkhunis and laymen and laywomen who had all understood your teaching and were established in it, that you would die. You would relinquish your life. You would depart from this world. It's time now. So will you keep your promise? And the Buddha says, yes, Mara, do not fret. I will relinquish my life in 3 months' time. And apparently the earth trembles, the earth shakes. And Ananda says, oh, what's happening? The earth is trembling. And the Buddha says to him, yeah, there are 8 reasons why the earth trembles, Ananda. And then he goes through all of these 8 reasons. And one of them is when the Tathagata relinquishes his life force. He gives up on life. And I've done that. And Ananda is horrified and says, no, please, don't do that. Don't go. Don't leave us. And the Buddha chastises, admonishes Ananda and says, well, look, Ananda, you had the opportunity to ask me to stay, and you didn't take it. It's your fault. Which does feel a bit harsh, doesn't it? I've always kind of thought, it doesn't quite ring true, does it? So I was thinking, before giving this talk, I was thinking, well, what's going on here? What is really meant? And I don't know what's really meant, but my current sort of thought, or the thought that came to me this morning, was that I think the compilers of the sutta are trying to reconcile, they're wrestling with a particular conundrum, and this is their sort of possibly rather crude sort of reconciliation with this conundrum. The conundrum that I think they're wrestling with is how do you reconcile the Buddha's enlightened mind, which is, I don't know, it's cosmic, it's reality itself, it's boundless, it's eternal, it's not human, it's way beyond human consciousness. How do you reconcile that with the fact that the Buddha died, or his body died? They're trying to, if you've got this reality principle that the Buddha embodies, then how have you got an old body, an old man's body, that's sick and is going to wither? You can sort of understand the dilemma. Is the Buddha the cosmic principle personified, or is he just an old man at this point? And of course he's sort of both. He's ungraspable, he's unknowable. And I think the compilers of the sutta are trying to wrestle with this. So what they've come up with is a rather contrived solution of the Buddha saying, do you know, I could be here for aeons. And then Ananda somehow failing to pick that up. So then, you know, the Buddha lets go of his body. Do you see? It's a mythical way of trying to square this circle. The same happens in a later sutra in the Mahayana tradition. There's a Sutra of Golden Light, where there's a disciple of the Buddha, Vicharaketu, who wonders, why did the Buddha die? If he was fully enlightened and at one with transcendent, you know, and one with reality, why did his body have to die? Anyway, it's a dilemma for Vicharaketu. And interestingly, it's only resolved for him when his mind expands. When he, well, his house expands, but it's a symbol for his mind. You know, he rises to another level of consciousness, and where there isn't this conundrum. It's not a dilemma. So I think that that's what's going on here. You've got this unfathomable phenomenon in the very existence of the Buddha's body, and a mind that is transcendent, unbounded, infinite, you could say, in a human, physical, finite, decaying body. For me, it's also pointing to the mystery of what it is to be embodied. Never mind an enlightened being embodied, which is perhaps really unfathomable, but even you and I being embodied, what is it to be human? Normally we don't think about this very much. We take it for granted. We just arrived, you know, through our mother's womb. We didn't sort of plan that, probably, or maybe we did. Anyway, we don't remember if we did. We've just arrived, and then one day we're going to depart, leave this body. We don't normally think about, well, who am I? What is it to be human and embodied? It is a mystery. I've been reading about near-death experiences. I've just recently read a book by a man called Bruce Grayson, who's a doctor in America, who spent, I don't know how many years, but a long time, researching into near-death experiences. He's not had one himself, but he's interviewed dozens and dozens and dozens of people who have had near-death experiences. And he started off as a skeptic about the possibility of consciousness surviving the body. He you know, he's grown up in a Western medical tradition, which regards us, of course, as just physical, and physical matter being all there is. That's how many people in our, I was going to say in the modern West, but actually probably all over the world, see the human condition as if we're biological machines, and consciousness being some sort of phenomenon that arises out of the brain. Anyway, Bruce Grayson, Dr. Bruce Grayson, interviews all these people, conclude, what he does is he tries to see if there are physical explanations for the stories that are described by these people who have had near-death experiences, like hallucination. Bruce Grayson tries to describe, theorize about, is it hallucination? Is it something that happens when the brain is being starved of oxygen, etc., etc.? You know, different theories. And he concludes that none of those are credible. And concludes his book, the book is called After, by saying the best explanation that he can come up with is that consciousness survives death. and that consciousness isn't limited to this physical form. I interviewed Ian McGilchrist, who's a psychiatrist and a just wonderful thinker, a philosopher in a way you could say, as well as a psychiatrist. He's taught English at Oxford. He's a writer. He wrote, of course, The Master and His Emissary, which I really, really recommend. And he's written another weighty, huge tome. I sprained my wrist picking it up, actually, the other day. It's a 2-volume tome called The Matter with Things. And interviewing him, I asked him whether he thought consciousness was an epiphenomenon of the brain or not. And he thinks not. I'm not surprised by that. I think not as well. But what I'm interested in it is that you've got modern, scientifically trained people saying that yes, consciousness is unlikely to just be a product of the brain. That's surely gives us food for thought as Dharma practitioners, because that's the Buddhist tradition. So even us unenlightened ones, it's a huge, unfathomable mystery as to what is going on, what's really going on. I'm going to sort of come back to that later on in the talk. So the Buddha has relinquished his life force. He's got 3 months. He knows that he'll die in 3 months, or let go of the body finally in 3 months' time. And he uses those 3 months to continue wandering, spreading the Dharma. So he relinquished his life force at a place called Vaishali in northern India. He dies in a place called Kusinara, even further north. And he and Ananda wander from village, town to town, through those 3 months. Now he's had, I don't know what sort of sickness he's suffering from, but it's said to be sort of very painful. His body is in pain, and he decides to consciously suppress that sickness so that he can wander for these last 3 months and teach the Dharma. And in place after place, he goes to see his disciples, and again and again he teaches the Threefold Path. Are you familiar with the Threefold Path? Can somebody say what the Threefold Path is? Yeah, Pranyagasha. Ethics, meditation, samadhi. Yeah, so sila, samadhi, prajna, thank you. Ethics, meditation and wisdom. Ethics, meditation and wisdom. Actually, before I go on to the Threefold Path, it might just be good to see, I've just talked about these near-death experiences, consciousness not being part of the body, not being limited to the brain, and we're not just the body. Might just be interesting to see, how many people here have that sort of sense, have that sort of intuition?
That it's not limited.
Yes, that it's not limited. Not limited. Yeah, so maybe about a third to a half. One of the things, of course, that is important is that Buddhism doesn't ask you to take things on blind faith. So you don't have to take my word for it or the Buddha's word for it. The Buddha even said, don't take his word for it. But one of the things Buddhism does say is, see if we can stay open to the possibility that Buddhism is true, that the Buddha's teaching is true. Because I think that openness allows for new experiences to arise. And that's what I'd urge you all to do, whether you have this intuition that yes, there's more to us than the physical body or not, whether you believe in that or not, see if you can stay open to that possibility. Because I believe that it's possible to, if you're open to it and you're practicing, is somebody going to get that? Thank you. If you're open to it and you're practicing, you might start to have experiences that confirm that for you. For me, they happened early on, not because I was practicing, but because I had, my dad died when I was 11, and I had experiences of him communicating with me after his death. And certain things happened that just I couldn't have made up. I don't think I could have made up. They weren't just imaginings. Hi, come on in. Do find a space somewhere. But I think that you can have meditative experiences which also indicate that consciousness might not be might not be limited to the brain. I think you can have dreams that intimate that. You might have memories, past life memories even arise. But if you don't have them yourself, I recommend reading books like Bruce Grayson's book, or listening to, on YouTube, there's a man called Ibn Alexander, who's a neuroscientist. You're a neuroscientist, was, and that's not really relevant, is it? But Ibn Alexander has a near-death experience, and he's a skeptic. He comes down with meningitis, bacterial meningitis, and he's in a coma for a week. And his brain, he says, has been the sort of front part of his brain, or the cortex, or something. Prefrontal cortex, maybe the top layer as well. I don't know what that's called. The cortex. The cortex. Thank you. So it is useful and relevant to have you here. Parinirvana. The cortex has been apparently eaten away by the bacteria, and so he couldn't have been dreaming, or there just wasn't that possible. And he has this near-death experience. Look it up, Ibn Alexander, which feels like, from a dharmic perspective, like he went into a Devaloka, like a heaven realm. He's written a book called Proof of Heaven. I'm going to be interviewing Ibn Alexander in August, so look out for that. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is be open to the possibility that we are not just physical entities in a material universe. The reason I think this is so important to be open to it is because your Buddhist practice, our Buddhist practice, takes on a different meaning. If we think that we are just limited to this physical body, and that matter is all there is, and death will just be the end, death of the body is just the death of us, then our Dharma practice takes on a different meaning. What are we really doing when we try and practice awareness and kindness and friendship and ethics? And because we're probably going to become better human beings, but if it all ends when the body dies, well, I think Buddhism then becomes a sort of therapeutic humanism. Do you sort of mean a sort of secular humanism? Now, I'm not knocking that. Well, I am actually. I mean, it's not a bad thing to be a better human being, a better kind of human being. It's not a bad thing, is it? I mean, if there were more people who were kind and aware, I think the world would be a better place. So I'm not. It's just that personally, I wouldn't have come to the Dharma if that was the aim. I wouldn't have given up on a worldly career, and I wouldn't be trying to teach the Dharma. I can be a relatively friendly human being. I mean, I've got further to go even on that front, but I could be and live a thoroughly conventional life. Yeah, and I'm not interested in that, because I think there is something much, much more magical, mysterious, and important going on. One of the things, interestingly, with these near-death experiences is that people come back and they say that they've lost their fear of death. The other thing that they come back with is a mind that's, well, their attitude is transformed, and they are no longer interested in material things in the same way, and they tend to become more altruistic. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? I'm going to come back to that. Anyway, that was a bit of an aside. I wanted to really touch on, at least, try and touch on this, the significance of the Threefold Path of ethics, meditation and wisdom. Now, the Buddha taught many different models. He taught, I mean, in those 45 years, there's so many different teachings. They're all methods to wake us up to whatever he woke up to, this freedom of mind that he woke up to. But in this final year, again and again, this is the formulation of the path that he repeats again and again: ethics, meditation, wisdom. So there's something very essential about this threefold path, because I think it, in essence, what it's doing is it's transforming our delusion, our innate unenlightenedness. How's it doing that? Well, let me start with why are we unenlightened? Unenlightened beings like ourselves, we are immediately absorbed in our immediate sense experience. Once we've got a body, we've got these senses. And whatever happens in our sense world is very, very absorbing and important for us. Yeah? So if I've got toothache, that is more important than Russia invading the Ukraine, probably. Does that make sense? In a certain, my world narrows to the immediate unpleasant sensation. Similarly, if I have had, cake or, well, I'll leave your imagination to pleasurable sensations, that can be all absorbing and we forget the larger perspective. We're very enticed by sense experience once we've got a body. That's what I'm trying to say. And we live our lives driven by seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. Understandably, that's what all animals, all organisms probably do in some sort of way. Yeah? But that is based on a delusion that I am just the body. Yeah, I am just the body. And the gratification, my immediate gratification, maybe the love for those nearest and dearest to me, is the most important thing. That's a delusion. The delusion is that, I don't know, that I'm a fixed entity. Maybe I don't identify just with my body, but I might identify with my personality, my memories, my experiences in my mind. So maybe I think of myself as a body and a mind, or a mind in a body, or something like that. And the Buddha's saying, the Buddha's experience is not that. He's saying that, of course, yes, there is sense experience, pleasurable and unpleasant sense experience. But actually what's going on is that we're not just the body and the mind. This whole experience of body and mind and this whole phenomenal world isn't what we think it is. It's not as real as we think it is. It's more like some sort of drama, some sort of mock show. Well, that's the word that's used. Some sort of magical illusion that's going on. Some people who had this near-death experience, these near-death experiences, Bruce Grayson asked them something like, did it feel dreamlike? Did it feel like you were just having a vision? And what several of them say is that no, coming back to this ordinary life, that feels dreamlike, compared to what they experienced in these near-death experiences. They say that that was more real than this. The Buddha says that this is a dream that we're living in. And in that dream, we think of ourselves as fixed and separate mind-body entities, and everything else out there is other than us. It's a bit like another analogy that the Buddha didn't use because he couldn't use because it didn't happen in those days, is a film. Imagine going to the cinema. I went to see Flea on Wednesday. It's a really good film, actually, about a refugee. Anyway, I can't go into that. I haven't got time. Go and see that. But when you're at a cinema watching a film, you can get absorbed in it. Pleasant, painful, funny, whatever it is, tragic things happen. But part of you knows that you're watching a film. You're not completely identified with what's going on. Well, it's a bit like we're in a film. It's not just that we're watching a film, we are part of the film. Does that make sense? I mean, it's hard to get one's head around this. We are part of this game of life. And for each of us, we want to be the hero or the heroine of our own film, but it is only one film. And when 8 billion people are all trying to be number one in this game of life, we will cause each other pain. Our own egotism causes each other pain. The death of the body will be an opportunity to see the game for what it was. It was never that real. It was never really what we thought it was. When you're watching a film, you don't take it so seriously. An enlightened being wouldn't take this phenomenal world, this body, this whole cosmos that seriously. For them, it would be like they're participating in a virtual reality game. Yeah? And the game that they're playing after enlightenment, the Buddha's game, if he was in a virtual reality game, the game he's playing is how can I alleviate suffering for the most people? How can I help others wake up? Because if you realize that it's not so real, it's not that it's completely unreal, it's not that it's not happening, but if you can see that it's not ultimately real, then nothing that happens, including death of the body, would be that serious. For us, it feels very serious. For those people who have near-death experiences, apparently it doesn't. And for the Buddha, it really didn't. So when he relinquished his life force, when he said to Mara, yeah, okay, 3 months' time, in a way, it wasn't a big deal for him. Nothing was really happening. Now, this is the unenlightened delusion that I'm a fixed and separate entity in a fixed and separate universe of material things, and those material things are ultimately as they appear to be. That is a lack of wisdom. It's vijnana. That is a consciousness that sees things in terms of me and world, subject or grasper and object or grasped, an inside and an outside. That's a delusion. And that is ignorance, and that's the basic ignorance that keeps us unenlightened. And you're right, Jack, and you're right, Arjavin, that as soon as we have that ignorance, we will just spend our lives, if we're not careful, trying to have pleasant experiences. And we might have some, if we're lucky. But sort of so what? Do you see what I mean? So what? So Sila Samadhi Prajna is an attempt to reverse that delusion. Because what happens is, as soon as we've got that delusion, we're going to have craving and aversion. We're going to have egocentric mental states. We will have them. As soon as we think we're a fixed and separate entity in a fixed and separate universe, we're going to want, and push away anything that threatens that. And then, out of those egocentric mental states, we will act in an egocentric way. Even us good Buddhists will probably at times act in a self-centered way. I do act in a self-centered way. You know, that last bit of chocolate or whatever. I live in a community, and you can see people being generous, and you can, well, you know, I can also see myself having that bigger dessert or whatever it is. and worse, I'm afraid. Sila, ethics, is trying to, first of all, work on our self-centered actions and saying, no, let's learn to be, even as a discipline, let's learn to be more generous and more kind and more considerate. Okay, so that's Sila, that's ethics, Buddhist ethics. And then meditation is trying to work on the mental state. So let's cultivate metta. Let's cultivate awareness, including awareness of other people, as if they were like ourselves. And then prajna, wisdom, by reflecting, what I'm asking us to do in this talk is reflect on what it is to be human, what it is to be alive, and trying to sort of prise open our normal assumptions of what human life is. That is prajna. If you reflect deeply enough, sometimes you get flashes of insight, particularly if you do so on the basis of sila and samadhi. Meditation, ethics and meditation. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to have a direct realization of the truth of things. And it happens. Those flashes can happen. Maybe they've already happened. Maybe that's what led you to the Dharma in the first place. You had a flash of something, an experience that told you, that showed you, not told you, that there's more to life than what seems to meet the eye and the ear and then so forth. If you keep practicing, those flashes are said to get more and more frequent. Sure, darkness descends again, delusion takes hold again, but the flashes become more and more frequent, and then at some point they become continuous, apparently, and that's what the Buddha was experiencing. Have you seen this film called, I can't resist this one more thing. What time do I finish? Is it 3:30? 25 past. Go and see The Purple Rose of Cairo by Woody Allen, where they're in a film and one of the characters in the film steps outside the film. And this woman in the audience, Mia Farrow, falls in love with him. And he's an adventurer in this B-movie. Everybody else in the film, The Purple Rose of Cairo, the B-movie, is appalled that he's left the film. He wants to experience reality. He hasn't a clue, really. And Mia Farrow falls in love with him. She's a bullied housewife. And there's this lovely line where she says to a girlfriend, she says, oh, I've met this man. He's handsome and romantic and so adventurous, and he's fictional, but you can't have everything. And it's an analogy for what the Buddha did. He stepped outside the film. And then nothing really can go wrong. Even the worst tragedies, even the wars, the famines, the horrors that samsara creates can't go wrong. But I want to move on, because of time, to the Buddha lying on this stone couch in Kusinara. He's made his way to Kusinara. And he's lying on this stone couch in this sort of grove of trees, amongst this grove of trees. It's like a meeting ground, a clearing, the meeting ground of the Malas, who are a community. And the trees to either side of him, as we heard in this beautiful reading, break out into untimely bloom. I don't know what Sala tree blossom looks like. I imagine, for some reason, that it's like magnolia flowers, magnolias raining down on the Buddha when it's out of season. And all these gods and goddesses, the devas, are apparently are present, waiting for this moment when the ultimate mystery happens and an enlightened one, who is never really identified with his body, the body goes. What happens to consciousness then? Because it won't be like Ibn Alexander's near-death experience, where there was still a sense of me in this heaven realm, and then he eventually comes back. The Buddha didn't have a sense of me as a separate entity. So what happens to him when the last traces of me, of his body anyway, die and dissolve. All these devas are watching, these gods and goddesses. And again, I think what this is getting at is this is of cosmic significance. An enlightened being attaining to Parinirvana is of cosmic significance. And the sutta says, these devas are watching, these flowers are falling. The whole, all the beings, people are gathered, all the animals are gathered, and there's a silence, there's a hush. And the Buddha, in a way for him, nothing's happening. And Ananda is weeping. Ananda is weeping. In fact, he has to take himself off to one side because he can't bear this. He's not enlightened. For him, his friend, his teacher, his master, the light of the world, he calls him, is about to depart. And he says to himself, the Buddha, who was so kind, is leaving. And he's weeping. And Bhante Sangharakshita says half of Buddhism is in that remark, the Buddha who was so kind. He's not talking about the Buddha's wisdom. He's not at that moment talking about his energy, his fearlessness, his ability to communicate with anybody that he meets. He's talking about his kindness. Because what happens if you transcend, if your consciousness transcends its identification with the body and with our ordinary mind, the result is love. You can't help but see that things are not really, we're not really separate. We're all part of this incredible film, this incredible game. All of us, we're just different manifestations of the same force. And if you're in touch with that force, all there is love for everything, And then that manifests as kindness and a desire to help wake other people up. There is not just love, there's said to be bliss and freedom and peace. But for Ananda, it was he who was so kind. Now, when I walked in here and I said, that, oh yes, there's such a lot of friendliness in this Sangha, what we're trying to do is emulate that kindness, even though we're not enlightened, perhaps. We're trying to emulate this lack of self-concern and this identification with another person, well, with many other people. And we can do it because as well as our delusion and our greed and hatred, there is also something of enlightenment within us. Human consciousness knows the truth somewhere. We can do it. The Buddha calls Ananda and he says, why are you weeping, Ananda? Do not weep. And he rejoices in Ananda, and he rejoices in Ananda's kindness and friendliness. Ananda, who's not yet enlightened, is known for his friendliness, his welcoming qualities, how everybody just really loves Ananda. So you've got two friends, one of them fully enlightened, one not quite. This cosmic drama happening, the devas, the whole of the cosmos, sort of holding its breath, waiting for this phenomenon that's never happened before. And they're rejoicing in each other's kindness and friendliness. Very, very human. Do you see, you don't leave behind the human when you attain to the transcendental. You never leave behind the human. And the Buddha asks his assembly, the assembly of gathered disciples, whether there's any last questions. Are there any last questions? Has anybody got any doubts about the Dharma? Anything that's unclear? Speak now before I depart. And there's silence. And the Buddha says again, ask, because then you might regret it. You might think the master is no more and I should have asked. And there's silence. And he asks a third time, and there's silence. And then he says, look, you might be frightened of speaking at such a time when, the cosmos is holding its breath. If you're frightened of asking, if you feel a bit shy, why don't you ask a friend to ask on your behalf of your question? This exquisite courtesy and kindness and consideration. And there's silence. And Ananda says there's no doubts. Everybody here, there are no doubts left. You've explained the Dharma, you've shown the Dharma. And the Buddha says, yes, I know that. And I know that. There are no doubts here. And then he ascends into dhyana. No, before that, he utters his final words. He utters his final words, and they are, all conditioned things are impermanent. All conditioned things are impermanent. In this game of life, everything is transitory. There's nothing to hold. All conditioned things are impermanent. With mindfulness, strive on. With mindfulness, strive on. It's his last exhortation. And the mindfulness that he's talking about is an ethical mindfulness. Be skillful and strive. If you keep being skillful and striving, you too will attain to enlightenment. That's his final words. With mindfulness, strive on. And then he gets absorbed into dhyana, goes higher and higher and higher. He comes back to the first dhyana after going through all 8, and then relinquishes. His consciousness leaves the body. It's the most peaceful parting of the body with the whole of the universe, and watching. And the earth shakes again, the earth trembles to acknowledge this cosmic drama, which for the Buddha has been like nothing happened, because death is not what we think it is. Even life is not what we think it is. And the Buddha had realized that at the age of 35, he'd spent 45 years helping other people to wake up. And he said that actually, after the death of the body, there's nothing you can say about him. It's not that he's disappeared, and it's not that he's existent either. The whole question of existence and non-existence is sort of to miss the point. He is an enlightened being, part of reality, as he sort of always was. There's nothing more you can say. It's the ultimate mystery. And it's that not only are we marking today, that is, I think, the ultimate mystery that we're all orientating our lives to. That's the only thing, I think, that is worth orientating our lives to. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Quite blown away by all that, so thank you. I'd say my spiritual path has been one of kind of fits and starts, which is probably true of other people here as well. And I'm sure most people don't set foot in the Buddhist centre one week and come back the next in saffron robes with a monk's haircut. Tempting though it is sometimes. But yeah, I'll start off, the first sort of experience I'll share, or what really felt like it kind of jettisoned me down the spiritual path, was actually my first real breakup. That's right, I thought I'd warm you up with a nice big overshare. That's right. I hadn't really experienced anything like that before, and I just didn't really know how to be. I just felt so unresolved, lots of kind of questions with no answers, and I was just all over the gaff really, sort of early 20s, living in London, and my friend took me along to a yoga class, and I felt for the first time what it meant to drop into the experience of the body as a means of kind of turning towards what was happening for me in that moment. It was like a real kind of epiphany really. so that kind of set the ball in motion. And I set up I started practicing yoga quite regularly, and I did a course of mindfulness, and it was based on the book The Power of Now. And I remember hearing for the first time, you are not your mind and you are not your body, you are the observer of both. And I thought, thank Christ for that. After that, that really sort of piqued my interest. I think I started coming to some drop-in meditation sessions. I was living in Brixton but working in Hackney, so I'd sort of go to the ones that I could make. So I would sometimes come to this one, sometimes the LBC. I think I went to the LBC in January once, and that is like Piccadilly Circus. It's mad in there. But my next sort of, I'd say, significant experience, and I didn't realise it was going to be, was at the North London Buddhist Centre of a Tuesday evening, quite an ordinary Tuesday evening, and we did the mindfulness of breathing to kick things off, and then we did a walking meditation, and it was just in this walking I was sort of I just felt lulled into this rhythm. And I really just I felt like a baby being rocked out on a calm sea. And from this sort of profound feeling of peace, just erupted this kind of bliss experience. And I was kind of in raptures. And then it stopped. And you kind of go around and how did everyone get on with the practice? And lady next to me, it was okay, my feet hurt a bit, and next person, I didn't mind it, back giving me jip, and they said, how about you? And I was just there like, just like single tear trickles down the cheek, couldn't really speak, and after then I was like, this Buddhism thing, it's quite good. And then I think I started coming to this centre a bit more regularly then, and went on retreat, first retreat at Vidrasana, and exactly as Mahaparinibana mentioned, I set foot in that shrine room for the first time. I don't know how many of you guys, probably most of you guys have been there, warm crowd. And I just remember seeing it's got to be about the biggest, goldest Buddha in Europe in there, hasn't it? And I kind of thought oh, okay, these guys, they're not goofing around. And just something about the presence of that thing, it really sets the tone, doesn't it? And this particular retreat was on the Four Noble Truths, and the teacher, I remember it was Vandana Jyoti, and I remember her saying, suffering is wanting things to be anything other than exactly as they are. We might not be able to change our external conditions, but we can change the way we feel about them. And I just thought, God, that's good. And also, she's good. Because she really, really is. I was spellbound. Again, the way she was just relaying these teachings with such imagination and with such a real kind of personal, reflection on them. And I just thought that was so amazing. I hadn't been taught like that yet. I didn't think in my practice. And I must say, credit where credit's due. All of the Triratna teachers are just so impressive. I'm very, very impressed by all of you. Really, it's very. There's a real emphasis on putting things into your own words. Put the Dharma into your own words. It's like at school, isn't it? They say, put it in your own words. Don't copy it straight out the textbook. It's, what do you think happened? And the emphasis on the kind of poetry and art and the storytelling, it really, I think, ignites something, certainly for me, but other people too. So after that, I started coming very regularly to the Buddhist Centre, did some courses with Sagarasila and Amapushpa, and the whole thing was just really gaining a lot of momentum and meaning for me. Alongside the yoga, as Amapushpa said, it was both of those things started happening really at the same time, which led me to go to India on a kind of spiritual quest on my own. And it was great. It was really wonderful. I felt very, very lucky to be there and to kind of be doing my meditation each day and hopping between ashrams and retreats. And then it culminated in my yoga teacher training. That was very, very transformative too. It was the sort of I guess, lineage of yoga that I've sort of taught under it. It's called Jiva Mukti, and it puts a real emphasis on, you know, it's not just stretching. What you're hoping to do with people in a class is lead them from, you know, people arrive feeling all quite scattered and very separated in their kind of I, me, my, and their somebodyness. And through this kind of experience of dropping into the body and dropping into the breath, you experience this sort of unity, like the whole thing kind of comes together and there's this experience of peace. So that's sort of what I love I hope to try and teach in my classes, and I've been doing that for a few years now. I'm going to hop ahead in the story a bit now, because otherwise by the time I finish my share, we'll all have left our earthly bodies too. But yes, so we'll fast forward a few years. So I found that, yeah, yoga philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, both have a lot of resonance for me. But over the pandemic, I think I did lose touch a bit. I think I did an online retreat, but just, you know, it was very hard keeping in touch, wasn't it, with people and things. And it wasn't really, I think, until I came back to Vajrasana last October. And I stood there again. I tried to go on retreat, but everything kept getting cancelled, didn't it? Everything. Standing back in that shrine room again with that big old guy, and I just thought, yes, this feels good. It feels so good to be back. And that particular retreat was on the Brahma Viharas, and I'd never really encountered that sort of aspect of Buddhism before, this sort of very rich set of practices and such emphasis on the kind of imagination and you know, a lot of visualization. And yeah, about sort of 3 days into that, I just felt like, yeah, this is the real deal. This really resonates, and I just wanted more of that, really. Just wanted to move towards the sort of, I think maybe I am a Buddhist. This feels right, and I want to start living by the precepts more fully, and yeah, kind of commit to this area of spiritual philosophy. So as soon as I left, I got in contact with Amra Puspa and was very, very lucky that she welcomed me straight into one of her groups, which has been just so wonderful, really, to have a kind of group of people to explore material with each week. And yeah, it's just all felt more kind of solid and sure and gained in meaning for me. So thank you very much. Thanks.
I didn't know I needed it until I found Buddhism, and then I realised that I really did. And how unexpected to find myself here, and how happy a decision as well. I started talking about Buddhism with my Buddhist friend Bridge several years ago. We were on holiday in Dorset, and we had a friendly disagreement about whether creativity gave you the same nourishment as Buddhism. I don't know if you remember that. I'm a cartoonist, so my creativity has always been very important to me, and my imagination has often felt like a doorway to my spirit. After my daughter and people I love, it's the most meaningful thing in my life. A few years ago, my life changed hugely when I had breast cancer, and after treatments and recovery, I went from being a full-time art teacher to part-time and re-established myself as a cartoonist after many years' break. I was about to have my first graphic novel published, and my life was feeling really good, and then my mum died all of a sudden. You know it's coming, but you are floored when it happens. I loved my mum so much. She was kind, special, funny, annoying, full of life, and I felt very alone in the way that only grief can make you feel. And then I heard Joanna Macy, Buddhist environmentalist, talking on a podcast about her grief after her husband of 60 years died. She was asked to edit a book of Rilke's poetry, and she didn't think she could do it. But when she started to read the poetry, she said she felt like she was being dipped in gold, and she laughed. And I thought, I can remember this, I was lying in the bath crying, and I thought, who is this woman who can find joy in her darkest moments? And I had to know more. And then I found Pema Chodron, and I gobbled up her books, kept them in my pocket or my bag all the time, looked at them every day. And the advice she gave wasn't just useful, it was essential. Lean into the pain, she said, so I did. After a lifetime of self-help books telling me to add on activities to find happiness, this seemed odd advice. I remember thinking, but if I give up to the pain, I may never get up again. What if I become depressed forever? But I lent in, and the pain and longing and the loss would come. I'd feel it, I'd cry, I'd give up, and then I'd be amazed that it would move on until the next time. I started trying different Buddhist schools, Dzogchen, Jamyang, Kadampa Center. I enjoyed the peace, the wisdom, the snacks. Kadampa have got really good snacks. They have got really good snacks. Italians, stunning. Pima was in my pocket, reminding me to lean in and not listen to the stories I told myself. And in time, my grief began to heal. I started coming to the Brixton Buddhist Centre. I always left nourished and uplifted, but I still never managed to quite stick at it. Where was the discipline that I yearned for? And then the pandemic hit. I'd run out of excuses. I was stripped of distractions, like we all were, scared, in need of support, wisdom and community, and I threw myself into the LBC online retreats. The depth, the wisdom of the Dharma, the community was something I'd hungered for without knowing it. In small discussion groups, I was stunned at the intimacy that could be created with strangers in a short period of time. The thin fabric of the walls of separation between myself and others began to dissolve. Then the lockdown locks relaxed, and I knew I didn't want to slip back. I asked Amara Pushpa if I could join a mitra group, and thankfully she found space. In the past year, I've benefited from Amara Pushpa's patient and kind wisdom and slipped into a kind alliance with these interesting, intelligent and compassionate collection of women who make up our group. Last summer, I experimented with turning away from Buddhism. No meditation, no Dharma, no Sangha, no Pima, and I missed it all. The wisdom, the kindness, the sense of peace, my heart unfurling like a flower during meditation. I missed the connection of the community. What was I rebelling against anyway? I realised to not step forward and declare myself a Buddhist felt like a small decision. I would be turning my back on the opportunity to benefit from wisdom, compassion, wonder, joy, and importantly, the magic of Buddhism. Why would I miss out on that? And somehow, Buddhism has become woven into my imagination and here and there into the stories I write as well.
I've heard a lot of people talk about always knowing there was something more to life, to our existence. This wasn't really the case for me. I spent the first 30 years of my life in a state that I can only now really describe as sleepwalking. Caught in this constant, unaware predicament of craving and anxiety. Am I free from these things now? No. But they have softened. I have softened, and it's thanks to my decision to embark on the path. Like many, the path sort of found me. Something I've learned about Buddhism is that it involves retelling the same story about how you got started over and over and over again. We do it a lot. But each time that I come back to the story, it changes. The parts that I emphasize morph based on how I'm feeling that day or that hour. But more importantly, the more I tell that story, the less attachment I feel to it. It's this process of understanding that they are a part of the events that shaped me, but they are not who I am deep down. And so I would love to share my origin story with you, even if you've heard it before. Some of you have. So my 20s were a wild time of self-discovery, wrought with a sprinkling of self-loathing. The center of my mandala probably would have been partying, drugs, alcohol, though I wouldn't have been able to admit it. For years and years, I went round expecting some sort of resolve, grasping for anything that might solve each momentary discomfort. That basically meant that I was going out like twice a week until late, Countless mornings, or rather afternoons, of waking up with this searing headache and feeling really, really hollow. Then reaching for a cigarette or McDonald's, sex, anything that would temporarily help was worth it, no matter the cost. And this constant loop of samsara felt very potent at that time and linked to some deep-rooted beliefs that life was essentially a joyride. Our consciousness belongs to us alone. I'm here, you're there, we are separate, and we are only connected if I need something from you or if you need something from me. That's what I was living with. And I no longer believe that to be true. In Buddhism, we talk a lot about glimpses or vision. Okay, I'm going to set the scene. London Pride, 2019. It's the last time I drank or did substances. I'd been working very hard on a show, and I remember needing to have some sort of release. So my friend and I bought matching cowboy hats and leather vests and took to the streets of London. And I want to clarify that I actually don't regret the outfits. The outfits were amazing. They may be repeated at some point. So the day progressed into an evening of partying, and I could feel this boredom just start to seep in, as it sometimes did. As the drugs wore off, I felt displaced, confused as to why I was there, rambling on about nothing to people that I just met. And this deep purple cloud of depression began to seep in, and I knew in my heart that this was the end of an era. This would no longer satisfy me. I cried a lot. Not then, but like the next time. I cried a lot because I knew that I had to stop. I met one of my best friends, David, who's actually here today, at a train station, and I poured my heart out to him. Just telling him my story behind a Leon's at the train station. And I was grieving, mourning, and having this kind of cathartic come-to moment. I'm halfway done, don't worry. So I went to Bristol, where I was working at the time, and staying in an Ibis hotel, which is, by the way, the perfect place to have an existential crisis. It's great. I really recommend it. So I arrived home from rehearsal one day, and I began crying, as I would every day that week. And on day 3 or so, I was feeling really, really claustrophobic. So I turned my attention to the window. And I looked out at this very mundane landscape. It was like a really gray day. And for the first time, I had this glimpse of reality as it truly was. Expansive, unfixed, magnificently intricate. And I remember I just kept looking at my hands, like spinning them around, feeling the air on them. I sometimes still do this. And I was bawling at this point, and I was either having a psychotic break or I was having a spiritual awakening. So I did something that I'd never done before. In that moment, I sat down and I started to meditate. I didn't know how, I didn't know why, but I did. And for the first time that week, a deep sense of calm washed over me. The hundreds of thoughts that were fighting for the spotlight settled, and there was only one voice. Like, not a voice, but this really rich awareness. And that was it. I was off. So I remember my collaborator at the time, Jack, had mentioned some meditation class that he was attending. So I started coming along to Monday nights and learning how to meditate, began taking courses, meeting the Sangha, and applying these new ethics to these ethics and new lenses to my life. And Jack, I'm happy to say, has now become one of my closest spiritual friends, and I thank him often for our chats about the Dharma early on. I'm really so touched that he's here as well. So my story of addiction was very closely linked to Buddhism, and I saw its power. I saw the powers of its application in those early days in benefit to my emotional recovery. To this day, my ability to understand craving and its origins have gracefully guided me through some tough situations. But what began as something to help me through that period has blossomed into something so much more. A Sangha that has welcomed and supported my practice over the years. A change in the quality of my interactions, in my relationships with myself and with others. And finally, this electricity that has begun to course through me, that there is more to all this. There is a magic that connects us. And so I am Buddhist. And I can't wait to keep on deepening my relationship with these spiritual friends, the Buddha, and with reality itself. Thank you.